Today we're moving on to more specific diets, and today we're looking at obesity, and we're also looking at celiac disease. Now, this chapter is quite a long chapter, but I would consider that it is part of the core of your home economics course, i.e. you cannot go into your Leaving Cert exam without knowing each and every one of the specific diets on your course, because they can come up in so many different places, whether it's short questions, long questions, etc. So this chapter covers celiac disease, obesity, heart disease, anemia, osteoporosis, high blood pressure, diabetes, and dental decay. Now, if we start with our first one here, which happens to be celiac disease. Celiac disease was on a long question in 2022. It was on question 4, the core, and students were asked for the specific dietary requirements, or the dietary guidelines, as another way you can interpret it, for a person who's suffering from celiac disease. It was worth 15 marks, and you had to give 3 dietary requirements at 5 marks each. Now, also, celiac disease has come up on short questions. There was one in 2006, and then again in 2018. So 3 years since we've been asked about celiac disease. And the second one we're looking at today is obesity. Now, certainly, this is one we're going to keep a very close eye on. 2013 or 2013, question 1B. That is the last time that we have seen obesity on a long question. So we're looking at 12 years ago. And the fact that there are so many people, young and old, in Ireland who are 20% at least above their body weight, their average body weight. It's a huge problem, particularly among young children. So it is one that is very topical, and therefore we're to keep an eye on it. I would also link with 2012. That's 13 years ago. Since they've asked, remember we did that in the first lesson, energy balance, energy input equals energy output, energy input greater than energy input less than energy output. That's not been asked in 12 years. So I would keep the two of those together. Now, back in 2013, on question 1B, it was worth 16 marks, and basically you had to identify the causes of obesity. So the marking scheme would have been 4 by 4 marks each. So each lesson that we cover on this chapter, I'll reference back when the topic has been asked on a previous exam. Right, so starting with celiac disease. Now, there's definitely an overlap with our chapter here on protein. Revision. So we know that gluten happens to be a fibrous protein. It's got a 3-dimensional zigzag structure, and we note that some people are not able to digest or break down gluten. They are lacking a specific enzyme that's able to break it down, and that's called gluten intolerance. Now, there are also some people who are celiacs, and this is a different thing completely. This is whereby it's described as an autoimmune disease. So it's where the immune system responds when the gluten is taken into the body. So just to be clear, gluten intolerance is where there's a digestive issue, where you're lacking a specific enzyme to help break down gluten. But celiac disease happens to be an autoimmune disease. Now, there are many people in Ireland that have a gluten intolerance, and it's often confused with celiac disease. Like, if you are a celiac, you literally have to have your own press separate press in your kitchen, your own separate toaster. You can't have crumbs of a gluten-containing bread coming in contact with your gluten-free toast. It's quite a serious disease for people that have it, and you know, when they go to restaurants, etc., they have to make it very clear that they are a celiac other than just gluten intolerant. So what is celiac disease? It's a disease where a person has an intolerance to the protein called gluten, but to a lesser extent oats, rye and barley. It is an autoimmune disease. Now, I'm confusing you probably there, saying an intolerance. They cannot cope with it in their diet. So I'm just going to write here that we have gluten intolerance, which many Irish people, believe it or not, even though wheat is so popular in this country. And then we have celiac disease. So just to be clear, so when we're looking at celiac disease, I'm going to highlight what you would say in an exam. So for us, celiac disease is an autoimmune disease. This is where the person who is a celiac, when exposed to gluten in their diet, an enzyme called transglutaminase changes gluten into a chemical that causes an immune response in the body, resulting in inflammation of the lining of the small intestine. And when you have an autoimmune disease, we say that it has what's referred to as an idiopathic cause. And idiopathic means unknown. Now, there are many idiopathic or autoimmune diseases that we will mention. One of them is type 1 diabetes later on in this chapter. So idiopathic, for no apparent reason, the pancreas, specifically the islets of Langerhans, stop producing insulin. Now, there are other diseases that you might hear about just in general conversation. There's an autoimmune disease called ITP, idiopathic thrombocytopenia purpura. And if you're covering the topics in biology like blood, idiopathic thrombocytes are another word for your platelets. So with ITP, for no apparent reason, your immune system attacks your spleen, which produces platelets. So your blood clotting mechanism is affected, and unfortunately your capillaries start to bleed first. And if it's not dealt with, if you don't get emergency platelets, what can happen is other organs within your body can bleed, and the doctors may not know where that bleeding is coming from. We've another autoimmune disease as well. It's called Guillain-Barré syndrome, and this again is idiopathic cause, where for no apparent reason the immune system attacks the nervous system. On our course we have autoimmune celiac disease, where for no apparent reason this transglutaminase changes the gluten into a chemical that has this severe reaction with the lining of the small intestine. And then type 1 diabetes. Have to say, it is an area that has always fascinated me, and I'm sure there's some of you even contemplating, you know, a career in medicine. And it is an area, these autoimmune diseases, that has to be extremely interesting. So celiac disease, then, know that it's an autoimmune disease for an idiopathic or unknown reason when that person is exposed to this fibrous protein gluten with its zigzag shape. And remember, again, just a reminder that gluten is made up of 2 polypeptides. The first one is called glutenin, and then that interlocks with a second polypeptide chain, i.e. a second protein chain, which is called gliadin. And together, the two of them make up the fibrous protein gluten with its 3-dimensional shape. Now, I would like you to learn that transglutaminase and be very clear of the difference between a gluten intolerance, lacking a specific enzyme, or having very little of an enzyme, and then you have the autoimmune disease, which is a different thing completely. Now, regardless of when you get celiac disease, there is one area of the body where it's going to affect dramatically. And this happens to be the lining of your small intestine. Now, we'll just draw a quick sketch here of our alimentary canal. So we know that when we eat food, it goes down our food tube or esophagus. Then we have our J-shaped muscular bag. Here we have our small intestine, and then we have our ascending colon, our transverse colon, our descending colon, and there we go. Now, it's this area here that we want to focus on, and that is our small intestine. Sometimes referred to as the squiggly bit, or the part of the colon that is very, very long. Now, not only is the small intestine very long, it's coiled up inside in, shall we call it, nearly a ball shape in the center of our abdomen there, but the surface area is even more increased, or greatly increased, because if we take out a section of the small intestine, rather than the lining of the small intestine being flat, we have these finger-like projections lining our small intestine. And these finger-like projections are called villi. One singular will be a villus. So we have our villi lining the small intestine. And the thing about the villi is, because of the fact that they go up and down like this, if we were to straighten out the villi, you'd end up with this massive surface area. And the key function of the villi and the small intestine is absorption. So as food passes down through our alimentary canal, our mouth, our esophagus, our stomach, into the small intestine, by the time food gets to the end part of the small intestine, all the macronutrients, the proteins, the lipids, the carbohydrates, they've been fully digested into amino acids, monosaccharides, fatty acids and glycerol. Like that, they are absorbed along with minerals and vitamins in the small intestine. So what happens when a person has celiac disease is, every time they eat gluten, if you can just imagine that the villi get worn down. So if we can just try there. So imagine the villi get worn down. Now, if that happens, just see what's going to happen at the surface area. So villi get worn down. So there is less surface area for the absorption of nutrients. And if there's less surface area for the absorption of nutrients, what you notice, particularly in children who maybe have undiagnosed celiac disease, and that is whereby they're not growing properly. Maybe the parent goes to their GP and feels that their child is just not growing as they should be. Possibly one reason is that all the food they're eating, not all of the nutrients from that food is being absorbed because of this smaller, or shall we say, less surface area on the villi. Right, moving back then to our chapter. So the villi of the small intestine end up being worn down, reducing the amount of nutrients absorbed by the body due to less surface area for absorption of nutrients. So that's one thing, but it is the key area of the body that's going to be affected if you have celiac disease. Then I would know at least 4 other symptoms, like bloating, abdominal cramp, diarrhea, weight loss, and, like we said, stunted growth in children. Now, not to put a damper on things, but it happens to be a chronic disease. Now, what does that mean, a chronic disease? It means it can't be cured. So when a person has a chronic disease, regardless of what that disease is, it's all about, because there's no cure, it's all about management. You have to manage that chronic disease because you can't cure it. And I suppose the best way for people who have celiac disease, the best way that they can manage their disease and manage these symptoms like the bloating, the diarrhea, very bad abdominal cramp, is to follow a gluten-free diet. So you must follow this gluten-free diet for life once you've been diagnosed, because it is a chronic disease. Now, dietary guidelines, as I said earlier, this was asked in 2022 and it was on question 4, the core. And it was on the second part of the core and it was worth 15 marks, 3 at 5. So students were asked to outline the dietary requirements. So guidelines, requirements, exactly the same thing. Now, what I'm going to say to you is, as we're going through each of the different diets or patterns of eating here specific to certain individuals, I would say to you, always give a balanced answer. So if you're listing specific requirements for anemia, osteoporosis, heart disease, etc., go for plus and minus. Now, what do I mean by that? Go for plus foods you should include, and then minus foods that should be avoided. It looks so much better on an exam rather than having avoid, 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 or include, include, include. What I'm saying is have a combination. Avoid this, include that, avoid the other. Now, obviously, there's going to be some diets where there's more avoiding than there is including, and vice versa. But if at all possible, try and give that balance to your answer. So you can see here, I have avoid, include, include, avoid, include, include. You get the idea. So just to write here at the side, balanced answer. So plus and minus, things to include and things to avoid. So what should a celiac avoid? Avoid products that contain wheat. So cakes, biscuits, bread, pasta. Remember we said when we were looking at other products in our cereal chapter, we said pasta is made from the semolina. That's the roughly crushed endosperm of a particular variety of wheat called Durham wheat. Include gluten-free flour and gluten-free baked products. Actually, Ireland is fantastic when it comes to this. I know, for example, a friend of mine whose daughter is celiac, when her parents go over, they're always looking for the gluten-free products from Ireland. We have such an amazing group of artisan food producers in Ireland, and many of them tap into what we call like a niche market. So there are some fantastic gluten-free products, and you don't have to be celiac. Maybe just feel that you're a little bit intolerant to gluten, that you have bloating after eating maybe white bread, etc. So we've plenty of options here. Include rice. Rice is devoid of gluten, so you can have those rice cakes, whether you have them plain and you want to put a scrape of maybe peanut butter or hummus or a bit of cottage cheese on a rice cake, as a snack or as part of a lunch. Then you have rice flour, which obviously is corn flour, rice flour, brown rice and white rice. Avoid oats, like porridge and flapjacks. Again, can we emphasize there is gluten-free porridge on the market, but oats do not naturally, oats naturally do have gluten. Eat plain meat, fish and vegetables. So don't include sauces. And I'm going to write here, if you want to write that in your chapter, roux-based sauce. And a roux-based sauce is a sauce which is based on flour. equal quantities of flour and butter, but it's usually wheat flour that we use, so avoid. The sauce may be like a bechamel that you'd make for a lasagna or a pasta bake. And rather than having desserts like cakes or gâteaux, eat fresh sorbets for dessert, or fruit salad could be another one either. Now, we have 6 points here, which is more than adequate. But another one if you want, and we only needed 3 back in 2022. But this was a short question in 2018, and it said, explain the significance of the following symbol to the consumer, and then name 2 products that use this symbol. So food products that are gluten-free and suitable for celiacs, 2 products. Now, some people would write biscuits and pasta and leave it at that. So you want to be more specific. So I've said gluten-free products like gluten-free sausages. I know Clonakilty have a gluten-free version of their sausages, and maize products. Maize, remember from our study of cereals, is to do with corn, so cornflakes would be a good option. Now, there was another short question in 2006, and I'll just actually, why not? 2006, I'm a bit of a sad case here that I can remember these. No life, only the life of home economics. So 2006. Now, I'd be pushing it if I said which short question it was, but suffice to say, I do know for definite there was a short question in 2006 on celiac disease. So we might as well refer to the 3 different occasions: the long question in 22, the short question in 2018, and the short question in 2006. Now, as far as, and of course it was worth 6 marks. As far as I remember, it was define celiac disease. So that was the first thing. And the second part then was you had to name 3 products that celiacs would avoid. And there was 3 lines. Now, obviously, the breakdown for that would have been 3 and 3. So we'll just put that. Remember I said to you always use a pencil. So at the side, 3 and 3. And you had your lines allocated. Can I just say to you, don't focus on the lines on a short question, i.e. you see 3 lines, oh, I better write 3 points. You see 2 lines, I better write 2 points. No, no, no. It's all about the breakdown here at the side of the short question. So if you have divided up your answer, which you should do for all 10 next June with your pencil at the side, well then remember 3 marks, 3 subpoints, 2 marks, 2 subpoints. So it's not that students write down incorrect information for short questions generally. They just don't write enough. So I'm not going to write the whole thing out, but I am going to refer to 3 points. So 3 marks in my mind. I'm going to say that it happens to be an autoimmune disease. I'm also going to mention about the enzyme transglutaminase. And I'm also going to say, for example, that there's damage or wearing down to the villi in the small intestine. If I wanted, I could have mentioned that it's a chronic disease, it cannot be cured and has to be managed by observing a gluten-free diet for life. Either way, whatever I say, it needs to be 3 points for 3 marks. Now, name 3 products that celiacs would avoid. A lot of people here would write down bread, pasta, crisps, for example. So what I'd say to students is, you know, it'll take the exact same amount of time. Every one of those that I've listed there has gluten. So what we're going to say is, I would say oats, wheat, and rye. Oats, I would say they have to avoid porridge. Wheat, I would say pasta. And rye, remember we had rye bread, crisp breads. And I think that is a far superior answer than just writing down 3 foods. The examiner knows, this student knows that there's gluten, not just in wheat, but also in, albeit in a lesser amount, in oats and rye. So there are 3 different occasions that celiac disease was asked on the exam. So another dietary guideline would be to include products made from maize. So we have, how many at this point? We have 6 here, then we have number 7. So, and then we could have number 8, could be if you are buying products, make sure that they have the gluten-free symbol on them. So considering they only wanted 3 back in 2022, we have 8 of them here. Just to note about maize, cornflakes can be included in small amounts, as an Italian study suggests some of the proteins in maize contain similar amino acid sequences, remember primary structure, to wheat gluten. Right, moving on to our second diet for today. Like I said at the beginning of the lesson, the last time that we saw a full question on obesity was an incredible 12 years ago, considering, as I say, how prevalent it is in today's society, particularly Irish society and among children. And it was on the compulsory question 1B, and it was part B. And what they wanted was the causes of obesity and or why obesity was so prevalent in Ireland, and it was 16 marks. So you had to give 4 causes at 4 marks each. Now, what is quite disturbing is that was 12 years ago. You'll notice in our chapter here, I have causes of obesity, not just in adults, but in children. Now, there's a fantastic, I admire him greatly, Professor Donal O'Shea. He has, I think it's nearly been his life, one of his life missions, to warn the government that the Irish public were, 20 years ago he was speaking of this, that the Irish people as a nation were facing into this epidemic that is obesity. And he runs an obesity clinic in Dublin. But what is very disturbing is that there are children attending this clinic. Now, there are other hospitals around as well in Dublin that are going to have clinics that they will run for obese children. But it is desperate to think that we're going to have possible causes specifically of obesity in children. But sad to say, that is unfortunately the facts. Now, first of all, what do you mean by the term obese? So we have morbidly obese, where a person is just extremely overweight to the point that they are shortening their life. And then we have obesity. Obesity is defined as when a person is approximately 20% above the recommended weight range for their specific height or their body size. Now, when we say weight range, for people individually, they might have the perfect weight that they would like to be. But from a medical point of view, we have what's described as a weight range. Some people are at the lower end of the ideal weight range, some are at the upper end, and some are smack bang in the middle. But so if you're outside, if you're 20% outside that range of weight for your body size, you are considered obese. Now, possible causes of obesity. So we have too many kilocalories. Speak to any nutritionist. And I've said to you in the live classes there and on our grinds weekly that always have what we call an anchor statement. So I have 4 anchor points here. Too many kilocalories, a problem with the thyroid gland. Remember this butterfly-shaped gland in the neck, sedentary lives, and psychological problems. Like, there are students who would see possible cause of obesity and their first point would be, oh, too much fat in the diet. Another point might be too much sugar in the diet. Another point might be too many processed foods in the diet. That's all diet, diet, diet. So try and have a varied answer, and varies different, because it's more than just diet. Never judge people, shall we say, on the surface. There are people, you know, that have problems with their thyroid gland, maybe have deep psychological problems, and they have an issue with eating or comfort eating. So it could be a medical problem, or it could be one of the described, I suppose, the most common cause of being overweight: too many kilocalories. Now you can link with energy input and energy output here. Remember I said, I'm going to put it actually here, 2012 energy balance. It was our very first chapter in the composition of food and energy. It's not been asked since 2012, question 1B, but I certainly think there is a very strong overlap between energy balance and obesity. So I'm going to put NB there to revise energy balance, and we have a sample answer with our chapter. So too many kilocalories. A person is consuming more kilocalories than they're actually using. So portion size is one of many problems, main problems, where people put too much food on their plate. And I suppose the Irish mammy is guilty of that. You know, 4 in family, 2 children, 2 adults, and everyone gets the same. Not so. Now, Safe Food, which is a food agency, which we'll be talking about in a different chapter, they have run some very, very good advertising campaigns on television, and one of them was to do with smaller plate sizes. Like, if a child's favourite dinner, I'm making this up, is a spaghetti bolognese, and they see that somebody has more on their plate than they have, I suppose it's the inner Cookie Monster. So if you have smaller plates for younger children, because they are smaller bodies and they don't need the same EAR, they don't require the same number of kilocalories, you have smaller size plates and the plate is full, but it's a much smaller portion. Thyroid problem, we said, this butterfly shaped gland in our neck. And in our very first chapter, we said that the thyroid gland controls metabolism. Some people are unfortunate in that they produce too little of a hormone called thyroxine and triiodothyronine, but mainly thyroxine. And as a result of producing too little thyroxine, their thyroid gland is underactive. So I'm just going to write there. So an underactive thyroid gland in the neck. Possibly the thyroid gland is producing too little of a hormone called thyroxine. Now, there is medication on the market today for people with an underactive thyroid. It's called Eltroxin. And by all accounts, people who've taken Eltroxin say that the weight literally melts off their body. Remember our first chapter, I said there's people who say, oh, I need only look at food and I put on weight. They're not joking. Their thyroid gland is not working properly, and as a result they tend to gain weight much more easily, because the rate at which they convert food to energy is much slower. And you should just always consider that there are lots of different reasons why people have extra weight. It's not for us to judge. Sedentary lives then. Sedentary lives, living a life of relaxation, couch potato, etc. And, sometimes if we're in a job that is quite sedentary, as in you're not doing a lot of movement, we must make a conscious effort to get physical exercise into our life. Not only from, I suppose I would treat health as being not just physical but mental as well. And just even going for a walk, particularly a stressful time like you are going through with your leaving cert year, just getting out for a walk, doing some kind of physical exercise releases endorphins in the brain, and people just feel that much better. So we want overall health is body and mind. So people who don't, if you have an office job, long hours, you're driving or getting public transport to and from work or college, etc., we do need, as I say, to make a conscious effort. And see how I've subtly linked in there 1 hour walk would burn off between 180 and 300 kilocalories. Now, can I just say, if you were burning 300 kilocalories an hour walking, there would be steam literally coming off the base of your trainers. And then I think one that is sometimes not really thought about, psychological problems. You know, I mentioned that you're the next generation. We said this in the first chapter, and it's important that we disconnect emotions and food. We try and keep them apart, and we're not doing a good job at that. By a child has maybe cut their knee, or they're feeling a bit sad over something, and you're comforting the child with food. So subconsciously, there's going to be this link between food and emotion. So when there's a trauma and the comfort is being searched for or looked for, they're thinking food is going to fix this. And sugar is quite addictive, and so on. So many people eat if they're feeling low or depressed, like that, trying to recreate the comfort that maybe they got when they were younger and when they were given food, like a nice treat, an ice cream, etc. So we need to break that cycle. So if we want to reward children, which is very important for good behaviour, maybe that you read an extra story at night time, or that you promise to take them to the cinema at the weekend, but do not or try not to reward young children with food. So food can they eat food to try and fill an emotional void, or so they think. And then you end up because of a high sugar content, a lot of food, the high GI. So you eat a high GI food, very shortly the blood sugar goes up, very shortly crashes, eat another high GI food, and you get into this cycle and end up with this sugar addiction. All of those different programs that we see on TV, and people are literally morbidly obese, like they've been told you will die if you don't stop eating, and they can't. So it is a serious issue, and is certainly contributing to many people's excess weight gain, this psychological comfort. I'll just put that down here, comfort eating. Right, so that's what we would have given in 2013, 4 main causes. Now, if you had another point, I'm sure you're thinking there, what could another one be? Certainly advertising, promotion, marketing, selling processed food, or multi-bags of crisps and cola drinks, which with our sugar tax, it's important that it's there, so that people are not going to be getting very, very unhealthy foods at a cheap price. But certainly marketing, advertising could be a 5th point there. So possible causes of obesity in children. Portion size we've just mentioned, and we said they shouldn't be given children the same amount as an adult. And I'm just going to mention there, use smaller plates for children. A lack of exercise, kids staying in at home, playing on their PlayStation 5, giving, don't start me, mobile phones to very young children, scrolling, all the different options that families have now. It's not just Sky, they've got Disney Channel, they've got Prime, there's a whole other world out there other than TV and consoles. And again, parents are often very busy. It does take a very conscious effort to encourage children to get out on their bicycles, out and play football in the garden in the evening, after school and so on, rather than watching that. But there are so many children not getting adequate exercise. In some primary schools, a lot of my students have said this to me, that they wouldn't have been allowed to run too much out in the playground because they were afraid that the children would fall because of insurance, etc. Again, that's very sad. It's something that needs to be addressed. Too many treats. Not having, so avoid having what's called, some people call it a sweet press, a goodie press. The treat press should not be in any home, because it's a go-to. And certainly when children are small and they're conscious that it's there, they may ask. But as kids get older, particularly teenagers, they just kind of mindlessly are going to the sweet press. So rewarding children with high fat, high sugar food, crisps, chocolate, jellies, etc. Many loaded with empty kilocalories. Also to, using food or treats as a distraction. When I get upset actually when I see, parents going around with their, again, who am I to judge, but, pushing buggies around, and they're handing in jellies, etc. and crisps into the buggy to keep the child occupied. We should try, like I say, and avoid all of that type of thing. Poor dietary habits. Another problem I have as well is people or parents who cook maybe 2 or 3 different meals for the family, whereby one parent might be on a low kilocalorie diet and they're having the healthy stir fry, and then somebody else is eating whatever, and then the children get, or maybe the parents are eating the stir fry, and the children then, it's to the freezer, out with the processed pizza, the waffles, the goujons that are not even chicken goujons, they're mechanically recovered meat, and so on. So, we need to get back, like other cultures within Europe, and we need to sit down as families and one meal. Now, okay, if somebody has a specific dietary requirement, like they're a celiac, etc., that's different. But certainly we're starting to lose that, eating as a family and so on. So poor dietary habits, letting children eat French fry sausages, and the same goes not just in the home, but eating out as well. Like I recall, I'm going back a number of years now, I've passed it, but if you were taking a child into a restaurant as a family, or there were children with you, and the option on the children's menu was sausage and chips, or burgers and chips, or chicken goujons and chips, and everyone else at the table is having maybe a really nice meal with their, meat and vegetables and so on. So more and more restaurants are definitely giving half portions for children. But, as parents, we need to be encouraging that as well. Now, possible side effects associated with obesity. So I'm going to put NB here. So what are the problems? If you are obese on a long-term basis, you could end up with type 2 diabetes. Now, I'm not going to cover that here today's lesson. We'll be looking at diabetes in a lesson on its own. But it certainly is a problem, particularly if the weight is around the midriff or the abdomen. Then you have respiratory problems or breathing problems. You can imagine someone very overweight and this weight sitting on their chest, putting pressure, causing shortness of breath. Could even lead to sleep apnea, where breathing repeatedly switches off during the night. Some people have such bad sleep apnea, they have to have an oxygen tank at night time in the event that they do stop breathing for a long period of time and their oxygen supply is cut off. Heart disease we'll be covering in a separate lesson. Varicose veins. whereby people who are very overweight, they're standing for long periods of the day, but the weight of the upper body puts pressure on the veins in the legs, and they can become quite bulbous and bulging out of the calf, particularly along the thigh or along the top of the leg, and can be very, very painful. And then infertility. For many people, particularly women, they can't get pregnant because they're so overweight that it has interfered with their menstrual cycle. And as a result, they've been advised, if you want to plan for a baby, in order that you're healthy, the baby is healthy, try and lose weight. So there are 5 there, and I would certainly learn each of them. But the diabetes and heart disease we'll be looking at in separate lessons. Finally there, we want to look at dietary modifications, or it could be described as specific dietary requirements. Like I said there earlier in this lesson, always try and go for a balanced answer. So choose, avoid, choose, avoid, and choose. So choose low kilocalorie protein foods: white fish, chicken breast, fillet steak, turkey, filling, but will be fat-free. So we'll just note that, filling, but low in fat. Avoid cooking food and fat. So as well as the kilocalories, remember 1 gram of lipid, 9 kilocalories. Frying increases the kilocalorie value, but also you've got the TFAs being produced. But so poach, grill, bake and steam food. Lots of fruit and veg, filling yet low in kilocalorie. More vegetables than fruit. So at least 4 to 5 servings a day because of sugar, fructose in most fruits. And also remember that the reason fruit and veg are filling is the fact that they are so high in fibre. Reduce our portion size, cut back, smaller plates for children. So reduce our EER, and we could include here smaller plates for young children. And that will help cut back on the kilocalorie intake. Choose low-fat versions of food. Now you have to be careful here. I never actually bought into that low-fat yogurt, low-fat X, low-fat Y, and glad to say, because even though butter's around 4,000 years, at least we know what it's made from, a pure natural product, which is cream. But for many, many years, these low-fat products were being bought, and yes, they were low in fat, but they had hidden sugars in them. Because remember, fat or lipid makes food more palatable or more tasty. So to compensate for the lack of the fat, the food manufacturers were putting in sugar. So low fat, but they were high in sugar. So it's important that we read the kilocalorie labels. So I'm going to put beside that another point there, read food labels. And just for now, I'm just going to write the word traffic code system, which we'll talk about in more detail in a chapter called Food Processing, Packaging and Labelling. And it's whereby on the front of prepackaged foodstuffs, you'll have the nutritional information, and then underneath you might see a green, a red or an orange colour. So if I see fat and there's red underneath, that's an indication that that food is high in fat. If I saw salt and green under it, this product is low in salt. It's a really fantastic system. It came in there at the end of December, it was 2016, December 2016, but it's really good. And it's a fantastic thing, say for a person who is maybe really overweight, is trying to lose weight, cut back the kilocalories, and they take a glance at prepackaged food stuff, and it's green under saturated fats or green under kilocalories, and so on. Right, so there's our obesity and our celiac disease. It's a very, very detailed chapter, which is why we're taking, as I say, taking it easy, small chunks at a time. So that's the end.